Welcome back, everyone, to Stream of Consciousness with Dan. Today's conversation is with someone whose presence stays with you long after the recording stops. Julie Barth. She has lived through experiences that could have hardened her, but instead they've shaped her into someone remarkably grounded, self-aware, and deeply human. What struck me the most wasn't just the strength in her story, but with the clarity in which she tells it, without dramatizing, without minimizing, just speaking from a place of truth. Our conversation moves through some very heavy terrain, but not heavy for heaviness' sake. Julie brings a steadiness that makes space for reflection, for nuance, and for the kind of honesty that invites you to slow down and really listen. I'm grateful she trusted me with her story, and I think you'll feel that trust in the way that she shares it. Let's get into it. All right, everyone, we are live with Stream of Consciousness with Dan. Today's guest has lived through chapters most people couldn't imagine, and somehow turned every one of them into fuel. Julie Barth is a writer, a mother of six, a trauma survivor, and the founder of the Colin James Barth Outreach. Her journey moves from heartbreak to clarity, from survival to leadership. She's navigated special needs parenting, loss, and emotional upheaval, and emerged with a mission to help women rebuild their lives with strength and self worth. Today, we're talking about resilience, reinvention, and the power of choosing yourself again. Julie, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Daniel. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm probably going to need to put a hoodie on. It is freezing here. I don't know what the weather is over there, but it is very cold here.
Well, it's
But
not cold yet, but we're supposed to have some huge ice storms, so we're all kind of keeping our fingers crossed.
yeah, because you're in South Carolina, correct?
I am, yes.
Okay, well, yeah, you're probably not used to a lot of snow or ice out there, so that'll be interesting.
No, no, but I am from Chicago, and I will say that, I
Oh,
moved here
cool.
and I I moved here and I was like, "Oh, snow." But the roads are so much different that you end up sliding all over. It's a crazy thing when you move to the south, how things that you can handle in the north, you
Oh,
just either you
no, I
forget or
I completely connect with that. So I grew up in Wisconsin. So, we can get a foot of snow in Wisconsin, and it's like, all right, whatever, no big deal. And then even in Omaha, where I'm at now, we'll get like 2 inches, and it's like the world is going crazy and no one knows what to do. So, yeah, I can
yeah.
connect with that. So before we get into kind of the deep stuff, I always like to kind of start with some joy. So I remember for me as a kid, joy for me was playing with my Hot Wheels NASCARs. I would just be on the ground. I had this rug with a track, and I would just race these cars around by myself for hours and hours and hours. I could name, all the drivers, all of the sponsors, all the numbers, etc. So as a child, what brought you the most joy?
I hate to say running, but I think I'm going to go there. I don't know if it was so much joy as it was peace. Sometimes I have a hard time separating joy from peace, but
Hmm.
I was that girl that was born to run. We all know them. People used to call me Forrest Gump when I was back in Chicago. But there was just something about hitting that curb where you're just running, and all of a sudden, like everything's good. You don't have to worry about anything.
Hmm.
Your mind just goes to a place where everything's just great. So I would say running was one of my greatest. I never wanted to miss it. Let's put it that way.
Well, you're a better person than I am. I go down the stairs to grab a water and I'm winded. So,
Well, again, I think you're a born runner. I remember my parents saying, I would say, I'm going to go run around the lake. And they would be like, why? And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, where are you running to? I'm like, I don't know. And I never really had an answer, but I would, take my little Walkman and I'd run around the lake and, you're just driven to it. I don't know that it's, about physical fitness. It's more of a mind clearing thing. And I really do believe you're kind of born with that impulse to run,
mhm.
just to get out of your element. So
No, that's really interesting because there are like you said, those people that they just love to run, and I can't relate to it because I think it's like you're a psychopath because that sounds horrible to me. But no, but I can sympathize with how it's you and the sidewalk, or it's you and the lake, and nothing else matters. It's just you're just kind of one with the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny because my first book, I start the whole book off with running, and just I was in the throes of stuff, and that was the only solace I had was like just to get my, and it didn't matter what was going on in my world, how bad things appeared, how stressed I was, um, just the act of putting my shoes on and getting out the door and that immediate just go. It really does. It's almost like you've got all this pent up energy and you start running in that energy that seems so like oppressive and tightening. It's almost like you just release it and it's no longer there, and then you run into a place where you get to not feel anything and you come home and it's like all of that anger or anxiety, whatever you're feeling, that intense emotion that you're having a hard time with, it's like you run it out. Unfortunately, I think I'm not only a physical runner, but I tend to be an emotional runner too.
Oh,
Maybe they
gotcha.
go
Yeah.
hand in hand. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, I'm good at avoidance. I'm good at, okay, I'm just not going to deal that with that right now. But I will say, it can be a detriment, but I consider it after everything I've been through. If I did not have those outlets, you know, everybody's got their vice, and I'm glad that that was mine, other than something, non-healthy. But it
Yeah.
does. I did break my femur. I had a stretch fracture,
Ooh.
so it does. You can overdo pretty much anything. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Ouch.
yeah.
That's
Yeah, I was
the
up to running
biggest
like
bone in your
15 miles
body.
a day. Yeah. Well, it was a stress
Oh.
factor, so it was like right down the middle.
Oh,
But yeah, I
goodness.
was, yeah. And the only thing I was upset about is that I couldn't run. I was like, okay, it's
Oh,
broken, but when
goodness.
can I go back to running?
Uh, You talked about kind of that release and to get you away from, what you were feeling. So could you kind of describe, you know, not what were you running from? Were there experiences in your childhood, or just kind of what your childhood was like to kind of want to, use running as an outlet to get away from things, if that makes sense.
I'm an extremely sensitive person, which I don't think people know because I'm very good at hiding it. I had a wonderful mother. I love her very much, but she was very hard, very toughen up, don't let anyone see you cry. And I was so just I am so sensitive. So I would keep all of that in. And my parents didn't really get along. So there was a lot of strife in my house. So just escaping all of that and, being in a place where I didn't have to worry about what people thought of me or what was going on or, who was mad at me, who said what about me. That was just so freeing to me because I did care so much. I absorbed the energies of other people. So if someone was mad, then I could feel if someone was unhappy. And I still do it, and I think just getting away from that, like putting that to the side and saying, like, okay, I'm going to focus on what I want, and that was really the only time that I said, I don't care about anyone else in this moment. I remember after I had kids, everyone said, oh, I'm going to get you a jogging stroller. And I was like, why? I'm like, the reason I'm leaving is because I don't want them with me. And they were, they just looked at me like, but there is something everyone always asks people like, well, how self-care, what'd you do for yourself? And I know that a lot of people would think it's absolutely insane for someone to want to run to release, as self care. But, anything else like going out with friends or, put me right back into that same position where I was
Mhm.
so conscious of everything, so self aware, so, worried all the time that that was just another situation. But running was the one constant that I could just, not care what anybody else was feeling and just focus on what I was feeling or not feeling. But yeah, just to quiet the voices.
Well, I'm glad you had that outlet, and I kind of want to get a little deeper into your story. So as you moved kind of from your childhood years to your adulthood years, obviously, your life became a little more complicated, which is safe to say based on what I've read on your profile. So, what were like the early moments or experiences that started to kind of shape the harder parts of your journey?
When I was, I think when I was in third grade, I moved from one small town to another small town. I say small, but I'm really in a small town now, not then. It was a suburb of Chicago. And I remember really one of the first people that I ever met was a boy named Colin. And, I can remember just everything about him. You know how you have those like imprints in your brain about certain
Hmm.
moments and you don't
Yep.
even know why, but you can smell, you can see, you can put yourself back there. And really one of them was knowing this boy Colin. And I was always really drawn to him, but we were very different people. And we went to the fun fair together in sixth grade, and he was my first kiss. And then for whatever reasons, he went his way, I went my way, went to different middle schools, or then off to high school and graduation. And see, fast forward, and I met him up at a bar when we were in our 20s. And I had this impression that I didn't really like him. I can't remember why. He was a
Huh.
quarterback or whatever reason. um and it was like instantly I had it was almost like, oh my gosh, I've been missing this thing and I didn't even know I was missing. So within a month we were living together. And 6 months later we ended up I ended up getting pregnant with our first son. And we decided at that point to move home to the place that we grew up because my mother and his parents lived there. So we moved
Hmm.
back. And um, we decided, I had always wanted a big family. I think I said, well, I probably didn't. There's just me and my sister, and it was very lonely growing up. We didn't get along very well, and we were very isolated. So my solution was I always wanted a big family.
Okay.
And so after our first son, I was like, we tried again, and we had two miscarriages. And then the third time I was pregnant, and it was a joy. I wasn't even trying because we had given up. And right from the get-go, she just the stopped growing. I would go in and
Oh
they said,
gosh, yeah.
congratulations, you're like 6 weeks. And 10 weeks, congratulations, you're 6 weeks. And after about 12 weeks, when they kept saying I was 6 weeks, the signals kept going off, like,
Hmm.
what's going on here? But this is back in 2000. So there is no Google, which is probably good, but there was no place to research. And, doctors were limited by, books, medical books, and, they
Hmm.
didn't talk to one another. And so they kept telling me she's sick and she's going to have problems, but we don't know what. So we had, over 40 ultrasounds, and she would grow and then she wouldn't grow. And so at 37 weeks, they finally said, we're just going to deliver her. We'll see what's going on, probably more for my sake than hers, because I was told that she was going to come out and not be able to breathe. I was told she had trisomy 18. Every time they would diagnose me with something, we'd have a test and they'd say, oh, that's not it. So I was just a mess. And when she came out, she was only 3 pounds. They thought she was
Oh.
6, and they had the wrong size innovation tube. So,
Hmm.
you know, it, I can't be upset about it because they didn't know, but at the same time, they damaged her throat severely at birth, and they continued to lie about it for years. She came out and she had, very significant needs. She wouldn't grow still, even after coming out.
Hmm.
And so we had to travel to the United States. And I think, after 40 some surgeries, she had a G-tube, she had a, trach, it was almost like she had a tube for her to do everything
Oh
for
God,
her.
yeah.
Yeah, but yet there was no answer. And everyone kept going back to the well, like, well, what's wrong with Tatum? That's her name. What's wrong with Tatum? Instead of like just focusing on, okay, why is she throwing up? Why is she, it was always like they wanted to make it her syndrome's fault or whatever it was. And like I said, we went to the Mayo Clinic, we went to Children's in Boston, Children's Memorial, and nobody could find anything wrong. So after about 5 years of traveling, we had a reconstructive airway, and she's doing really well. And people started coming up to me in stores and saying, "Is your daughter the one on that Discovery Channel show?" So this is 2001, and I had no
Okay.
idea what they were talking about, like none. Um, and it was like two random people I didn't know, and then my best friend called me one day and she said, "I think I know what Tatum has." And I was a little put off because I was like, "Well, good on you," because nobody else does. And at that time there was AOL. I punched in primordial dwarfism and it was like she popped up. Everything, her facial characteristics, her birth, everything was explained by this Discovery Channel show. And although we've never had her formally diagnosed with it, everything follows that path.
Hmm.
So she's about 4 foot, she's 24 pounds, and she'll be 25 in April. But
Oh my
so
God.
yeah, yeah, her first running shoes were like 0 to 3 month, like gap shoes. She was 8 pounds at the age of one, running around the house. So,
Oh.
um, but I remember telling Colin, like he came home from work, he was a trader down at the Board of Trade, and I was devastated, to find out that she had it.
Hmm.
And I was crying, and I was like, "Come here, come here, come here." And I was like, "You got to read this." So he sat down, he looked at it, and he's like, "Okay, what's for dinner?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Devastated? What do you mean, what's for dinner?" Like our daughter has this. And his answer was, he looked at me and he said, did you really think there was nothing wrong with her? And I remember thinking, yeah, I really did. And I think as
Oh.
long as someone doesn't give you an answer, you can fill in the blank for yourself. And my blank was always that she's going to grow out of it. She was going to be of normal height. She was going to, live, prosper, and be fine.
Hmm.
And, so there was a readjustment period, but Tatum's amazing now. And, she always will be. So that was
No,
kind
that.
of the
Oh.
first hurdle. Yeah.
I mean, that's quite the first hurdle. That's a pretty high one to get for. I don't want to laugh at it, but like I always say, if you don't laugh about it, you have to cry about it. So, um, but
Yes.
no. So I guess I kind of wanted to ask then, because obviously that's just as a mother. I mean, I'm obviously not a mother, but as a mother, you want, your child to be, super successful and awesome and perfect and great and everything. And she is in her own way, obviously. But how do you get the courage to, try again, knowing that like there's a possibility that you could go through that again? I guess, is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the deaths that we had seen, like we almost lost her. I personally revived her probably 4 times. She died in front of me. So I think at that point it was a huge like, oh my gosh. And then it was like for real. Like,
Hmm.
so she's gonna be short. And yeah, I think it's like anything else in your life where what seems devastating when you find out, it just once you settle into it, it just becomes your normal. And I think for myself, and this is speaking for myself, I think that special needs parents are almost we're the hardest on our children because I was never hard on her because I cared about who she was or what she was. I was so concerned with other people judging her, that I tried to
Oh,
make her
gotcha.
the most perfect possible. But what I didn't recognize for many years was that I was the one judging her, and that's
Hmm.
a hard thing to, and you're not judging them because you don't love them or because you're embarrassed of them. You just don't want you see the hurt in them when people don't accept them, or you feel the hurt for them when people don't accept them.
Hmm.
So I think for many years I tried so hard to get her to live up to everybody else's standards. And she did. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. Anytime someone says she couldn't do something, she did it. Um, but I did push her very, very hard those first 5 or 6 years. I was the push, push, push. I almost had separated myself from her because I always felt like she was alone. Anytime on loan, LOAN, anytime that I became really close to her, something would happen and it was like instant, like, don't get attached to this being. She's just here for a bit. And it was very hard for me after well, I guess I haven't gotten to that part yet.
That's okay.
Um, but my husband and I, Colin, we were the perfect, like I was the push push and he was the come here, and she
Hmm.
could rely on that like comfort. So, we were a great pair to make her the best that she could be.
No, that's just beautiful because I mean there's stories out there all the time, but yours has just been it really hit me when I started reading your profile when we matched. And I mean, not only do you have her, I mean, you still have your other you had your son. So how did your son kind of navigate through that? Because it probably wasn't easy for him either.
No, it wasn't. He was. I'll be honest. Like I don't. A lot of the things that happened, I don't really remember. I do remember because she had a trach, and I had to stay up all night. Like I couldn't sleep. We couldn't find nursing care, and I do remember just like fighting to get 2 hours of sleep because I thought, my son really needed me. It was almost like, okay, this thing happened, but I was like determined to not let it destroy his childhood. But how could it not? He went from being 5 years old and having his mom all to himself. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was a personal trainer, but
Hmm.
to just completely losing me because I was gone for probably a year and a half traveling when I was pregnant with her because of the miscarriages. If he even showed like a cough or sneeze, I was like, go to your room.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I mean, I see a lot of the repercussions of it now. I'm sure it was very confusing to him. I'm sure he probably, how could you not resent
Yeah.
that position? But at the same time, he's always been our biggest champion and friend too. So, I'm sure he had mixed feelings about all of it. He's an amazing guy now. After everything we've been through, I think we all learned a lot of lessons. So.
Well, that's great. I love that. So, I kind of want to transition now. So she's, I guess, as stable as she can be at this point in our conversation. Uh, so like I was kind of getting at, obviously you had four more children. So can you kind of talk about that, or do you want to talk about maybe was there a segment maybe I missed in that, or just kind of your next step in your journey?
Um, well, she actually started doing really well. Like I said, we had therapies and um, there's a reason why she's here. I mean, because there's no reason why she's here. Let's put it that way. So right as she was getting better, I no matter what's happened in my life, if I decided I want something, I'm going to do everything I can to get it. So
Mhm.
I went right back on the track of having a big family. And I know there were people that was like, what are you talking about? You already have one, you've got another one. Why would you want another one? And I proceeded to have my third child, my son, and he was just like this bright light, and it was the best thing that I've ever done because it pulled away from the tragedy of what I went through with Tatum, and it reminded me that, oh my gosh, babies are easy. Look, they can breathe on their own.
Yeah.
And all the joy that he brought to our family and made everything else light. So yeah, we had my son, and then since that went well, we were getting over the whole Tatum thing. We didn't need nursing anymore. We had surgery to have a trach out, so we decided to have our fourth child. Well, I did. I He came probably kicking and screaming, but um, so when our youngest daughter was 6 months, we were back in our old lives. We were a part of the community. We had four kids running around. We were very involved in the school. Colin was coaching, and everything was just kind of like, oh, this is what I've always dreamed of.
Hmm.
And we were having this huge Halloween party, which we always do. And Colin was a trader down at the Board of Trade. So, when things weren't going well at work, I kind of knew because it was a very stressful job. But we got to a point where he just wasn't being himself. He was very withdrawn. He just was like something was going on. And he was back and forth to the doctor because he had stomach aches. And for this party, I was like, I need you to just go to the doctor and go to the hospital and don't leave. Don't let them tell you everything's fine because they were handing him Carafate and antacids. And I rushed to the hospital probably about 3 hours after he's there because I just had this feeling in my gut that something wasn't wrong or something was wrong. And I walked in the door and he just had this look on his face. And I was like, what happened? He said, well, the surgeon came in or the doctor came in and he said he found something he wasn't expecting. And his beeper went off and he walked out and said he'd be back. And I was like, okay. And like right as I was walking in, the doctor walked back in again and told him that they found a tumor on his pancreas, which was inoperable, and several lesions in his liver. And so at that point, we really didn't know for sure what we were looking at, but they suggested that he had pancreatic cancer. Um, so about 4 days later, after being released from the hospital, going home, we were told that he had, like I said, stage four inoperable pancreatic cancer, and that he had 2 weeks to live. That I should
Oh
take
my
him home, let
God.
him say goodbye to his children. Yeah, it was a shock, something that we
Oh
really
man.
were not expecting.
So what was the grief process like? Obviously, he's going to die. I don't know if that's a curse or a blessing. It kind of is a blessing in some sense that you know it's going to happen and it's not, just like that, but um just kind of what was that like and how did you handle that with your children? Because I think a lot of people that, go through what you're going through, it's a super, I mean, I can't even empathize whatsoever what you are going through in that situation. So how did you handle that?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't think he was going to die. His mother was one of the oldest living ovarian cancer patients in the United States. So it was genetically linked. She, at that point, was diagnosed at 41, and she's probably 50. She was 20 years into her treatment and doing great. So I think we all kind of, or I did, I think Colin did as well, had this impression like he's going to beat it too. She beat every odd you could ever imagine. So, and all the things that they told me Tatum would, she was never going to walk, she was never going to talk. I think I had lost faith, and that's kind of the way I approach life anyway. Is okay, you believe what you want to believe, and I'm going to believe
Hmm.
me. And I tend to not I tend to pick and choose what I want to believe. And so they said he had 2 weeks, and I was like, oh, no, he's not. So we did get him in a treatment program in the University of Chicago. And he was their star patient. I mean, he lived for 16 months, but about 6 months in, we got, for anyone who has been in the chemo world, you go in, you get this little chair in a little booth, and they hook you up, and then they escort you, and the next person comes in. Well, we were like rock stars. We came in, and he was doing so, his tumor had shrank so much that they thought he'd be eligible for surgery. And so we walked in, and they would give us a private room because we were proving that this experimental drug was working. Um, so my oldest son was in a travel baseball team, and he was going to Cooperstown for a week. And, he was doing so well that he decided against, we had a very heated discussion about it, but I also knew that this is something he needed to do. So he ended up taking 2 weeks off to go on this baseball trip. When he returned, he went down for chemo, and you have to give blood in order to be eligible for chemo. And they, at that point, discovered that it had traveled into his spine. And so they immediately kicked him out of the trial. And it was like that day, bye, see ya. So he called me
Oh
from the
gosh.
hospital and let me know. And yeah, from there, it was just a downhill slope. So,
Well, I don't know how comfortable you are with talking about, obviously his passing, or if we want to just move past that, just let me know.
um, it was, like I said, the first 6 months were amazing. A lot of, I shouldn't say amazing, but he spent time with the kids, and there were a lot of good memories toward the end. He wouldn't come out of his room. It had traveled to his brain, so he had so much pain that he would just sit in the room with his sunglasses on, and no one was really allowed to even talk or go in there. So I think that was the hardest part, is that he's got these four young kids, and they don't really understand what's going on, the gravity of it. Obviously, my son, who was 12 at the time, did. But it was just, he was 6'3" and probably 200. And by the time it was all done, he was about 76 pounds. And when
Oh
I
my
say he
God.
wasn't going, I mean he was not going.
Hmm.
And rightly so. He was 35, and had four little kids who were waiting for him. So I think the hardest part was that he wouldn't come down or see the kids because he was saving his energy for the cure. And you couldn't convince him out of it to say, like, you only have a limited amount of time, Kyle, you should come down. Um so I think the hardest part of all of that, and something I did not feel for probably decades afterward, is this. It was is very survivor's guilt is so so complex. And I always thought survivor's guilt was like, in Twin Towers, someone makes it up, someone goes down, or in
Hmm.
some sort of accident. But try those last months, I would lie to him all the time. He'd say, like, oh, when are we going to chemo? Oh, we're going tomorrow, because he didn't have the wherewithal to really understand. But every time I told him a lie, I knew it. He didn't feel it, but I did. And wishing that wishing for him to go. Those are all things that you do because you can't stand to see the suffering. But after they go, it sits and resonates with you. Like, how could I ever? Why didn't I take advantage of those last moments? Why didn't I? Why didn't I? And I think when someone truly believes, because I had fought so hard with Tatum for 7 years, and she turned out amazing,
Hmm.
that I think he started to believe that I could do the same for him. I got him into the trial. And I think that he started somewhere along the line really thinking that I could save him. And when someone else believes that in you, you start believing it yourself. So, those are very complex things that after he passed, I kind of just like shelved. I was like, yeah, I don't even know that I knew it was there. I just knew something was eating at me. And I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to process it. I just wanted to like put it all in my past and move forward.
Well, before we take a quick break, I kind of wanted to get into, obviously, it was a perfect segue actually, because you talked about just wanting to move forward. So, was there a point where, I mean, obviously you're going to honor his life, and obviously you started the Colin James Barth Outreach, but when did you decide to, stop, not necessarily grieving, but honoring? I guess if that's a fair question.
I think that when he passed, everyone else's grief just started. What people don't know about cancer that goes on for a long time is everyone else's life goes on, but yours doesn't. And, it's like when you see someone who's pregnant and you're like, oh, that went fast, but it doesn't for the person who's in it. So, after he passed, I had a lot of people who just then started grieving his loss. And I was like, I've been sitting in this for 16 months. Like, I have no more power to grieve. I'm done. I've got to put the situation in my past. And it was almost like people wouldn't let me. They'd see me places and they'd cry, or I would say my name, and everyone in the community knew us so well that they'd be like, oh, and it
Hmm.
was almost like it followed me, and I couldn't sit in it anymore. So I decided that I was going to live on with my world. And I lost pretty much my 20s and my 30s between Colin and Tatum, and I didn't want to spend any more time grieving or feeling bad. So I thought, well, I'll just pack it away and move across country. I met someone who I thought, was a very caring soul, and he said he acted like he was broken too. He had just gotten out of a relationship, and I thought, oh, this is perfect. We can heal each other and start over. So, I didn't honor him at that point. The Colin James Barth Outreach didn't come about for 15 years. I had a
Oh,
book that I had
wow.
written. Yeah, I had a book that I had written about losing him and Tatum's story, and that had sat in my laptop for 15 years. So it was almost like I put everything on hold and I started my new life. And it wasn't until things went really south in the second life that I finally said, now it's time. Now, I promised Colin that I would make something meaningful come out of all of his suffering. And it was almost like the universe kept like throwing things at me, like, are you ready yet? Are you ready
Yeah.
yet? And, it just came a point where I couldn't keep pushing it away. I had to acknowledge it and move forward.
Oh, pardon the interruption, folks. But before we continue with my conversation with Julie Barth, I want to take a moment to highlight two organizations that sit at the heart of her story. The first is the Colin James Barth Outreach, a nonprofit created in the wake of profound loss, now offering compassion, resources, and community to families navigating rare genetic disorders and the kind of medical uncertainty most people never see. Their work is grounded in real, lived experience, and it shows. Alongside that is Hope for Tate, inspired by Julie's beautiful daughter and the strength she carries into the world. If you've seen Tate's artwork, you know it's more than art. It's expression, resilience, and emotion captured in color and line. Hope for Tate helps raise awareness and support for families walking similar paths, and it reflects the same courage and creativity you've heard in Julie's voice today. You can learn more about both the Colin James Barth Outreach and Hope for Tate through Julie's website. If their mission resonates with you, and I sure hope it does, I encourage you to take a look. Even a small gesture of support can ripple farther than you can think. Now back to my conversation with Julie Barth. All right, everyone, welcome back to Stream of Consciousness with Dan. We're going to get a little deep here. We're back with Julie, who's already gone through so much, and she's in her second marriage, and she's going through a lot of abuse. And I know there's way more women going through abuse than need to be. Obviously, there should be zero. But could you just kind of talk about that story, how you navigated it, and eventually how you overcame it?
Sure. So, yeah, after Colin died, like I said, I was determined to have the family I wanted. I always wanted a big family. When everyone was looking at me weird when I had, children after Tatum, each new child that I had really just it healed me. It healed my life. It made all of our lives richer. So I wanted to have another child, and like I said, there was a gentleman who was working in my house. He was 10 years younger than me, and, I can't describe him more than people always say, like, well, what are red flags? Like, he was a walking red flag. And had I been in my right mind, I don't know if I would have seen it or not. I tend to always be gravitated toward the grumpiest person in the room or always want to pick people up. So,
Mhm.
it makes sense that it was almost like if I could save him, I could save me. So right from the get-go, his world, everything was bad in his world. And I was like, oh, good, we can fix all of this together. So we were in the same town that, everybody looked at me like I was this heroine when I was the caregiver of Colin. And it almost felt like the tide had turned when he passed away. I felt like I couldn't do anything correct or right. And I think that was I acting, inappropriately, or I don't remember, to be honest with you, but I do know that I think there's something in the human spirit where when bad things happen to people and it seems as if there's no reason for it, it makes us feel very vulnerable in our own skin. And I think sometimes we try and find fault in the people that bad things happen to because it makes us feel like, well, then it's not going to happen to us because you know, there's a reason why it happened. She deserved it, kind of feel. And, it's taken me many years to kind of backtrack and feel that way about parts of it again. Was I perfect? No, not in any stretch, but I definitely was struggling. And I decided, well, that's fine. I'm going to go on with my life, and I'm just going to put Julie Barth in the past, and I'm going to pack everything up and we're just going to move. So I ended up we did IVF because I wanted another baby and got pregnant. And of course, I think the town had no idea that it was intentional. And literally just packed up, moved across country. When we were looking for houses, he wanted a house that had no neighbors, and he didn't want to be in a community. And I was right there with him. I was like, neither do I, because I felt so stung by the community we were
Mhm.
in. So we ended up moving to this beautiful mountain house. I mean, it was picturesque. It was literally built into a mountain. But once we got there, everything I thought I wanted was like, oh gosh, I didn't. Colin had 7 brothers and sisters. I didn't talk to any of them. I had friends from grammar school I no longer kept in touch with, and everything just seemed to be falling apart, and I couldn't understand it. I had our daughter, and then unfortunately Tatum, my daughter with special needs. It's a long story, but while we were traveling back home, the one time we did, my son was sitting in the middle seat and he went like this to her, and she had a lump on her chest. Well, you fast forward 2 or 3 months, and I thought it was just a hematoma. I had had her nurse check it out while we were in Chicago, and it wasn't. It just kept growing. And she came to me one Sunday and she said, Mom, my chest hurts. And my gauge for her was always, well, Tatum, is it bad enough that you have to go to the doctor? Because then she'd be like, no, no, no. And when
Mhm.
she said yes, I was like, oh,
This
so
is
we went to
real.
the hot. This is, yeah, something's really wrong. And she showed me, and I was like, oh my God, how have you been? It was almost as big as her. And I was like, how could I have missed this? But took her to, the urgent care. They sent us to the hospital. She had emergency surgery. And of course, my ex-husband was off vacationing with his dad and having a grand time and irritated that I was going through this and needed him home. Very irritated that I was, taking a chunk of his good time. So
Ugh,
they removed it,
yuck.
and yeah, yeah, they removed, and mind you, so I have 4 kids up on a mountain, one with special needs, one who's
Yeah.
just entering high school and, having problems of his own, and then a newborn baby, and now we have this thing, and the surgeon said after removing it that it was just a blood clot. Well, I'd been in the medical field world long enough to know that doesn't sound right, but at that point, I was willing to take it. Like, okay, that sounds great. That sounds like nothing. We're going to go home. But in the back of my head, I was like, that that doesn't. If it's Tatum, this is something more. So it took about a month and a half, but I got a call on Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas Eve, and they said, you never came back for Tatum's follow up. And I thought, well, so what they did was they had to just take it out at that point, and they said, "But you have to." We were supposed to go back, and I said, "Well, I don't really ever do those if I don't have any problems, because I could live my life in a hospital with Tatum." And they said, "Well, the surgeon really wants you to come in." And I thought, red flag. And they said, "So he's going to wait around for you tomorrow," which is New Year's Eve,
Yeah.
um, after surgery at 3. And then my alarm bells went way off. Like, no surgeon is going to wait around for a follow up, checkup.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hung up the phone with them, and I thought, I can't wait. I called back and I talked with someone, got him on the phone. I said, "It's cancer, isn't it?" And he said, "Yes." So yeah, it was they had to send it out. Thank God he did. He was a great surgeon out of Levine's and Children's, in Charlotte. And he sent it 3 different times, 3 different labs, because he knew that something wasn't right, but they couldn't identify it. So by the time they did, it came back and it was a rare connective tissue cancer. Um, so this is true to Tatum. There's only 30 cases of it in the United States, and 99% of it is in geriatric patients, and she's 12 at the time. So the good news is that, well, the good and bad is that there's no other treatment besides removal. If you can remove it, the chance reoccurrence, knocking on wood, is pretty low. So but it was brutal. They had to go in and take her entire right side torso and then graft her legs. And at this point, she's 20 pounds. She's probably three
Oh my.
two. Yeah. So and it was really in that at that time in my life when I recognized that I was truly alone. Like, my ex-husband wouldn't come to the hospital. He wouldn't help with the kids. He was off taking jobs out of town, and just like wouldn't be in the recovery room with me. I literally was on my own trying to juggle
Mm-hmm.
all of my children back at home. Um, so that, we got on with it. And what doesn't make a marriage better than having another baby, right? So
Yeah.
we decided to have one more, and along came our 6th child. And I will say that he was never around, meaning he was either taking jobs out of town or going somewhere, doing something, going on vacation. It was always me with the kids, and that was usually what we fought about. But looking back on it, thank God he wasn't there. um, we ended up moving further south near his parents, and that's really when just everything fell apart. He was he was extremely abusive. It started out, just it was always confusing. Like, I never understood what was going on, because I would go to him with a small problem, and I would be so clear. I'd be like, "Can you just come home at 6?" And if I even said a word, it would erupt into this huge, like, "Well, you're a bad mom," and like throwing stuff, breaking my things, threatening to leave me. And then when he would threaten to leave me, I would just freak out, because I was like, how can I do all this on my own? Not really recognizing I was already doing it on my own. But, it was a decade of trying to maintain and manage, and trying to keep my kids away from him, because he was very abusive to my children.
Mhm. Can,
Um,
can I just interrupt you for 1 second? So obviously it's hard enough what you're going through with your children, and obviously the purpose of a marriage is to make each other stronger and to be there in, times of need. So I guess, is there an organization or any advice you would give to people maybe that were in your situation? Because I really want to share, because I don't want that to happen. It's just nasty and terrible. So
Yeah.
is there any advice or any organizations you would suggest for people that were kind of going through your situation?
Well, I think the hardest part about personalities like these is that not only are they telling you you're crazy, you're behaving crazy because you're reacting to the way that they're treating you. When you say that you're supposed to have a supportive, that was the problem is like Colin and I were a team. We always made sense. I never,
Hmm.
not that we never fought, but like nothing I could ever imagine was so bad that we wouldn't be together. And here I was in this relationship where not only was he telling me I'm the problem, I appeared to myself to be the problem because I would explode. Like I saw a side of myself that I had never seen before. So
Yeah.
as if that's not bad enough, he's going around to all these neighbors making friends with them, but I had no time because I was taking care of children. And he's going back home and he's telling everyone that we know that I'm crazy, that I'm broken, that I've done all these things to him, that I'm just erratic and he doesn't know what to do with me. And so and so your world shrinks because all of
Hmm.
a sudden people start reacting differently to you. And I will say that I probably gaslit myself for many years thinking, well, if I just fix myself, if I just go to therapy, if I just take anti-anxiety medication, clearly I must be broken. Something with Colin and Tatum broke me, and that's why I'm behaving this way. And I would say to anybody out there, if you see a side of yourself that you've never seen before, regardless of what came before it, the person you're with is part of the problem. If you have, attended therapy, if you've worked on yourself, if you have done everything to better yourself and you still can't find peace, then it's not working. And you need to get out of it because it's not going to get any better. I used to just think, oh, well, if I just keep my mouth shut, if I just blank, if I don't explode, if I but these kind of personalities, it's impossible to do that because their whole objective is to get you to react because that's how they keep you in control. So if you find that you're in a relationship where you think if you look up and the sky is blue, but they keep telling you it's purple and you know that it's blue, don't convince yourself that you're wrong. I mean, that's what they're so good at doing. And then all of your resources, they're going behind the scenes, they're telling your family you're crazy, and then you get embarrassed, so you behave differently in front of your friends and they think, what's wrong with Julie, she's not acting like herself. So as far as organizations go, unfortunately the organization is you. No one, I could have had 30,000 people come up and say to me, and they did say to me, maybe your marriage isn't the best, and you know, I, I was okay listening to a certain extent. And then when they started bad mouthing to the point where I would have to do something to really act, to make a change, I was terrified because when you're in that kind of a relationship where you're trying to manage everything, you feel like you're managing it, right? And you think, if I do not keep this intact, it's going to get worse. And you can't even imagine it getting worse, but you know that you don't want it to get worse. But again, every emotional abuse is not really recognized in the court. Now, thank God they're finally talking about coercive control. It's another, whatever you want to label it, fine. But, I think you just keep telling yourself, like, well, he's not hitting me. You can't see any bruises. So, and you
Oh,
tell
yeah,
people
yeah.
about it. Yeah. And so, you have to necessarily consider that you're the problem. Um, I think in the end, one of the things that I learned, and I will never go any other way with, is if I'm in a relationship with someone and it's not working and it's causing me misery, and I've really given it my best shot, it doesn't matter if I'm at fault. If I had walked away, that was my biggest fear. I'm going to walk away and everyone's going to think I'm crazy. I'm going to walk away and he's going to find someone else and I'm going to be at fault. And it doesn't matter if you're at fault or not. You could be the craziest person in the world. That's fine, but you're not going to fix it staying in that relationship. And I would guess if you have no other problems with anyone else in your life and this one person is somebody that you do not recognize when you're with, then that is a function of the relationship. That is not an internal thing. And you can't fix your internal self to fix an external problem.
No,
So
absolutely. Yeah. That was really well put. And I think it really resonates with me because, I mean, I've not really been, emotionally abused, but I do suffer from chronic depression. And I think sometimes emotional abuse, whether it's just from a disorder or disease or something, is so much more painful than a physical. You know what I'm trying to get at? Like, I feel like if
yeah,
I'm hurt, like if my heart is hurting or if my brain is sad, it is so much more painful than a slap or a punch. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm not condoning that, obviously, but
right. No, and
uh,
you, yeah, I hear you. I hate to downplay physical abuse. I mean, like as we talked about off air, like, yes, he threw things at me. Yes, he did grab me around and he threatened to kill me. But when you go into that kind of a situation, it's like when you hurt yourself, you can see a bruise, you can see it getting better. You know, eventually it's going to heal and you're going to be
mhm,
back to normal. You're going to be back to fully capable physically, right? When you have emotional abuse, there's no healing period. There's no time to catch your breath. There's no time to get back to where you want to be because you're constantly being degraded and back and until there's really nothing left of you emotionally because everything that all your coping skills have been taken, all of your ability to deal with stuff has been taken. You become hyper vigilant, you react, and then but it's such a crazy cycle that if somebody, and it's hard for me to tell people who have not been in it. So
yeah,
when I'm speaking on these podcasts, I am not speaking to people who haven't been in it, who I want to them to empathize. I'm speaking to the people that are in it. And if this makes sense to you and you understand the true torture of what I'm speaking of, then you are experiencing it.
hmm,
And that's the hardest part is saying, wow, like it's not just me and it's not going to change because they don't want it to change. And when you finally do, I mean, I got to a point where I became so numb that I finally would be like, fine, don't come home. Fine, do whatever you want. Well, then that wasn't enough because when I was like, fine, do what you want, he didn't get a reaction from me. So they necessarily have to ramp it up. That's when
hmm.
kicking doors in started. That's when grabbing me by the throat. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. I mean, Gabby Petito is a perfect example. Emotional abuse, it it always turns physical. It will always, if you stay in it long enough, it necessarily has to turn physical and it only has to take once.
No, that's just absolutely wonderful advice, and I just can't wait. I literally can't wait to just share this with everyone because I mean, you've been through about the biggest ringer I think you can possibly go through. Um, but so I kind of want to pivot positively now. So you've obviously have the Colin James Barth Outreach and the Hope for Tate going on. How can we support you in the best way? Because I think those are both incredible organizations. Is it financially? Is it, grassroots, word of mouth? How can we support your mission? Because I love your mission. That's why I have you on the podcast. So I just kind of wanted to give you the floor to kind of talk about that.
So when I started Colin James Barth Outreach, my goal was to like, oh, I'm going to provide daycare. I'm going to provide da, 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 da. I had all these things that I wanted to provide through a charity, and I still do. But what I found when I got into the charity world is that people would say to me, "Oh, like the Combi Center does that. Oh, uh, Justice Law does that." And so I kept hearing like, oh, there's services out there. But, my experience was there weren't any. I didn't have time to research them if there were. And it was like all the charities felt more like, oh, you have savings? Well, come to us when they're all gone. Oh, you drive a car? Well, come to us when you don't have transportation. Oh, you have housing? Okay, well, come to us when you're fleeing. And I think that that is really reason why women stay. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you're stuck in this position. Like, what am I going to go back to work? I haven't. I remember when Colin died, I tried to get a job, and they were like, "Well, what's your work experience?" As if I had been in a bubble for 10 years.
Hmm.
And now that AI's come around with your resume, you can't even get in the door. So basically, we're in our infancy. What we're doing right now is we are networking with other charities out there because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we're putting together databases of all the charities that are out there, and we're trying to operate our charity like a concierge service, or like a
Cool.
consulting. Yeah, you come to us because every situation is different. I've been the special needs mom who couldn't get RSV, shots for my daughter.
Mhm.
I've been the widow. I've been the caregiver. I've been the divorcee. So, and each one of those things required different resources, different needs. So, what we want to do is we want to help the individual. You come to us, we're building databases so that you tell us what situation you're in. And, when you're going through crisis, you talked earlier about making an outline. You cannot get it together long enough to make an outline. You don't even know where to start. You go to the government's like, well, come back when you have nothing. You go to the lawyer, they're like, hand me a $5,000 check you don't have.
Mhm.
Just to retain them. So we're trying to pair what's out there with what people need, to bridge that gap, because most charities, they're so top heavy on administrative costs, because it takes a lot of money to find people and to vet people. And so we're trying to kind of cut that out by having everything we need in one place. So you come to us, we say to you, call this place, or so something as simple as, fill out this application, we have it right in front of you. These people can pay your
Mhm.
mortgage. Oh, you have a dog, these people can foster your dog. um, we don't want to, in, let's say, scholarship terms, we can't provide the full ride,
Yeah.
but what we can do is we can give you little scholarships, right? That when you
Mhm.
piece them all together, you've got the full ride. And we can provide those services for you when it seems like no one else will. And if no one else will, that is where we want to be, so that we can be the canopy when no one else is available. If you want to support us, we're always looking for other charities that want to network with us so that we can, play back and forth. We're always looking for volunteers. um, a lot of the stuff I do is just counseling women to tell them, when you asked about organizations, our organization would be a good one. If you think that you're being abused, you have to be very careful about who you talk to, because my husband was talking to everyone behind my back. So anybody I went to was already thinking, oh, she's crazy.
Mhm.
Again, when you try and leave, it's very dangerous. So we'd like to be that source. If you need to find out, like, we will tell you whether you need to get out. We will help you find, and we'll give you steps that even if you're not ready yet, come to us and we can at least get you on the road to, organizing, to have things, to have an emergency plan. Because if you don't have an emergency plan, when you hit emergency, it's not going to go well. And that is for every woman out there. I had the perfect marriage. I was supposed to be together with Colin forever. We were doing well. We had this life, and I never thought anything would go wrong, but things go wrong, and you have to be prepared for it.
No, that's incredible, actually. I love that model, to be completely frank. It's really neat. It's, like you said, more of a network and kind of you're utilizing all the resources at your disposal in one place, which is really cool. So that's, yeah, that I wasn't even expecting that. I've interviewed a lot of, nonprofits, and not to knock any of them, but yours really, after you kind of described that, really stands out. It's a really modern and unique way to actually help people in every aspect of what they need. So that was, oh, I just, yeah, that's awesome. It's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I just, it's like, okay, I only have $2,000 to give to someone, right? But it's gonna cost me $500 to find that person. And I just feel like there's so much charity out there. And why, I could raise $2,000, give someone $2,000 and be like, that was a great year. But if I can give 10 people $2,000 by networking and finding them the resources that are there, because again, you don't know what you need until you get there.
Until you
One
need
of the
it. Yep.
coolest, yeah. And one of the coolest things I found was a woman who will take your pets and foster them. Because if you think about it, if you, like, I have 4 dogs, right? They're my life. If I had to vacate my home
Oh
right
my God. You
now,
have 4 dogs and
I
6 kids?
Well, now only 2 are at home, so,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
but, if I had to flee my home, I couldn't find a rental with 4
Mhm,
dogs, so there's a charity out there that will foster your dogs until you can get situated, so you don't have that hurdle, they're taken care of. It's just all of these little things that you don't think about until they happen to you, and then you don't
mhm,
have time to pivot. So, um, you know, as many things as I've been in a lot of different situations. The one thing that is common to all of them is when you hit a crisis, the last thing you have energy for is to figure out what resources are out there. So you go without. I remember just thinking, no one's going to help. So I just got to do my thing. And you do in certain aspects, but hey, if I can take care of your mortgage payment for 2 months so that you can pay your lawyer, great. If I can find your dog so that you can get a cheaper apartment for 6 months, all these little things might not seem big, but when you are struggling with whether you should leave an abusive relationship or struggling with a husband that's dying, those, little hacks, whatever they are, give you enough breath so that you can exhale for a day and start up again the next day.
that's awesome. Well, Julie, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, your strength, your candor and your stability in your heart today. Your journey really is a reminder that even in the hardest seasons, there's still room for courage, for creativity, like you're doing with your organizations and connection. So, for everyone listening, whatever you're carrying today, I hope this conversation just gives you a little bit of light, a little bit of hope, and a sense that you're not walking alone. There are people out there like Julie who are out there in your corner to help you. So, as always, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone, for spending time with us today. Julie's story is one of resilience, creativity, and a mother's unwavering love, and I'm grateful you chose to sit with it. If her journey moved you, again, I encourage you to check out the Colin James Barth Outreach and Hope for Tate. Their work is real, it's needed, and it's rooted in the kind of compassion we could all use more of. So, as always, thank you for listening, and we'll talk soon.